Excuse me. Good morning, everyone. Nice to be with you this morning. So last week, Dave was speaking about Jesus feeding the 5,000. And one of the things that he mentioned was that this is, aside from resurrection type stuff, this is the only miracle that Jesus did during his ministry that is recorded by all four Gospels. And this week, we're going to go to a story that is only recorded in one Gospel. Jesus walking on the water is recorded in Matthew, Mark, and John, but Peter walking on the water is only in Matthew's account. Now, this never really puzzled me or worried me because all the Gospels are written by different people. They've got a different focus. They've got different stories. Sometimes they're shared, sometimes they're not. Sometimes there's bits of stories that are the same, and sometimes other people include other details. So I was never really worried that this extra bit of detail was included in just one. That is, until I heard that the likelihood of Mark's Gospel being based on Peter's account. So why wouldn't Peter's account include this part of the story? It's such a significant thing. Why wouldn't Peter want Mark to share that in his gospel writing? Now, there's lots of theories about this, as there are with all things. And one of the common ones is that actually Peter was just embarrassed about it. He fails. He starts to sink. And so why would you want to highlight that failure? But this theory falls down for me, because Mark's Gospel also includes what I think is one of Peter's biggest blunders, where he denies Jesus after Jesus has been arrested. Now, if Peter was interested in Mark writing a Gospel that reflected well on Peter, I don't think this bit would have been included. I think one of the more likely theories that Peter walking on water is not included in Mark's Gospel is actually Peter's humility. Peter did start to sink, but he also walked on water. Other than Jesus, what other person in history can claim to have done this? And I think that actually Peter was there going, that was a really amazing thing that happened. But I don't want to highlight that because I don't want to pull focus from what Jesus was doing. I want the stories that are in this gospel to reflect on Jesus and his character and his goodness. So let's focus on that rather than the cool thing that happened to me. But this morning, actually, in one sense, I do want to focus on the cool thing that Peter did. So just to recap, Jesus has fed the 5,000. And when he's done that, he directs the disciples to get into a boat and he'll meet up with them later. Jesus then takes himself off to pray, which, on a side note, I think is a really interesting reaction. I think if I was Jesus, I want to be hanging out with my mates at this point and kind of like talking about this amazing thing that just happened and reveling in their excitement and praise. But he goes to pray on his own. And in my head, this is always quite like a solemn thing, like he takes himself away quietly and sits down and, just prays. But actually, when I was thinking about this for today, I remembered the fact that actually prayer is just conversation with God. And I wondered whether Jesus actually just wanted a minute to go and be with God and say, Dad, did you see that really cool thing that just happened? Like, there was loads of people and they were really hungry and I wanted to help them. And there was a packed lunch, and by your blessing, we just fed them all. Like, I just have this kind of feeling that Jesus actually just had all of this, that he just wanted to share with his Father. So maybe just as a side lesson from today, we could take away that sense of when good things happen, let's share them with God. Let's not just go to him when things are tough. Anyway, back to the story. So we have this very cinematic picture painted for us. The disciples are in a boat. They're a long way from shore. The Sea of Galilee is about 13 miles long at its longest and 8 miles wide at its widest. So when we say far from shore, we could be talking miles from shore. It's dark. It's not the middle of the night. It's not pitch black because we're told dawn is coming. But it's definitely not daylight. They're being buffeted by the wind and the sea spray. And then they see a figure out on the water. The disciples were afraid, understandably. So they say, it's a ghost. But Jesus quickly responds with reassurance that they don't need to be afraid because it's him. Peter then calls out, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus says, come. Peter then steps out of the boat and begins to walk towards Jesus. He then gets distracted by the wind and the waves and starts to sink. But Jesus instantly rescues him. And then they get back in the boat and the wind and the waves calm down. So what I really want to look at this morning is this cool thing that Peter did. Not to pull focus from Jesus, because as you will see, that would literally be in contradiction to what I want us to learn about this morning. But I want us to begin with Peter's cool thing. Because so often we tell the negative part of that story. That Peter started to doubt and he started to sink. And it made me wonder how much we focus on our failures and the failures of others around us, rather than our achievements and successes. One of the things that seems to be happening increasingly is that with social media, there's just this forever information stored on the internet. People's failures can never be forgotten. There's more and more stories where someone wants to do something with their life, but because of some stupid mistake that they made and commented something on social media when they were a teenager, they're forever tainted by it and held back from doing the good things that they want to do. One of my strongest memories of secondary school, where I spent 5 years of my life, a place where I actually achieved quite a lot of good things in various ways. But one of my strongest memories is of a failure, an embarrassment. Who wants to hear the story? So my secondary school, as with many, had this big kind of sweeping road that kind of came round the front where all the buses would come in to do drop-off and collection. And at one end, right at one end of the school, at the one end of the road, there was this massive pothole. And when it rained, this massive pothole became a massive puddle. And one break time, I'm going to say that this is kind of like in the beginning of my secondary school years, so I was a bit younger, but still. One break time, me and some others decided that we were going to try and run at the puddle and jump across it. And we actually had several successful attempts, which, now I think about it, might mean that the puddle wasn't quite as big as I thought it was, but it felt really big at the time. Anyway, whilst we were doing this, somebody else from somewhere in the, I want to say playground, but that doesn't sound like a secondary school term, but anyway, they kind of came and joined us, and they ran from where they were, and they jumped across the puddle. And everybody cheered, and it was all like, yeah, he did it from a really far away distance. So my competitive nature comes out at this point. I'm not proud of it. And I decided I was going to run the length of the school and then jump over this puddle. So off I went, walked down the end, and I began my run. And obviously, as I'm doing this, I'm running past everybody else who's just out there, and I start to gain attention. Because I was running pretty determinedly. And as I approached the puddle, I tripped. I was close enough that the top half of me landed in the puddle. And what I discovered afterwards is that not only was everybody who was just out and playing saw this happen, but the staff room that overlooked this area, I'd also gained the attention of all the staff. So they all saw it happen as well. It was a massive failure. And not only did I think about it for the rest of that day, but I thought about it quite a lot that week. I thought about it quite a lot that year. I thought about it quite a lot the whole time I was at school. Every time I was on the bus and the bus went bumpity bump through the pothole, I thought, oh, man, that day. Oh. And like even years later, when I think about like what could I say as a failure, that's the thing that comes to my mind. So like I say, we have a tendency to focus on our failures or others' failures. And even in the word count for this story in the Bible, we get one simple sentence for Peter getting out of the boat and beginning to walk towards Jesus. And then we get several sentences about how he fails and needs rescuing. But Peter walked on water. Now, before you get too worried that this sermon is becoming Peter worship, I think that actually the thing we need to take away from Peter's success is how he was successful. And that is through Jesus. So just put yourself back in that cinematic picture again. It's dark, and the boat is tossing around on the waves, and the wind is blowing, and the water is spraying up and getting in your eyes. And suddenly you see a person walking on water. Do you though? Is it actually possible that it's just the pre-dawn light on the stormy waves, viewed through your blurry eyes? Is it any wonder that they thought they were seeing a ghost? And one of the things I really like here is that Jesus doesn't leave them worrying and guessing. He says, don't worry guys, it's me. Have you ever had one of those moments where you just know you're going to make somebody jump, and there's no way to let them know that you're coming without making them jump, but they need to know that you're coming, and they need to know that you're there, but it's all just going to be, I kind of feel like that might have been what was happening for Jesus. He was walking towards them going, oh, how am I going to do this without making them jump? But Jesus doesn't leave them stewing in their fear and confusion. He just straight away says, it's me. And I love that Peter's reaction is different to everybody else's when Jesus says this. I don't know about you, but I think I would have been totally happy to let Jesus just carry on walking towards the boat. I'll just sit here in the boat where I'm, not out on water. But Jesus is like, I want to be part of this. Tell me to come to you, Jesus, so I can be with you straight away. Peter is already showing success in this story just by being willing to trust in the fact that that Jesus was there, that he was not a ghost, and to trust that if Jesus said he could come, that he would be able to walk on water. I wonder how many times we ask for a miracle and then don't really trust God when he says yes. So Peter gets out of the boat and he walks on water. But actually, as much as I said I wanted to talk about this, here's where we actually come to the bit where we pull it right back to Jesus. Peter walks on water when he focuses on Jesus. The moment he gets distracted by what's happening around him, he starts to sink. I picture this as one of those film scenes where you kind of got this hustle and bustle and there's people and stuff happening all around. And then two people see each other and they make eye contact. And with that focus, the rest of the noise and the busyness just dulls down around them and becomes so much less important than the moment that they're having with the person. It reminds me of that other reading that we've had today, where God tells Elijah to go and stand by a mountain because the presence of God is going to pass by. And there was a wind, there was an earthquake, there was a fire, but God wasn't in any of those. God came as a gentle whisper. There's that moment of intimacy. And I think the same would have been true for Peter at this moment with Jesus. When Peter focuses on Jesus, he walks on water. There's an intimacy that that Peter gets with Jesus that none of the other disciples get to experience. Focus on Jesus is the key to walking on water, even in the midst of a storm. sometimes I find it hard enough to remember to focus on Jesus when there aren't any distractions, let alone when things are trying to distract me and are busy at all sides. But focusing on Jesus is what will allow us to walk on water in whatever way that looks like. So here are 3 things that I think will help us to focus on Jesus. Number 1, get some focus. Number 2, get to know Jesus. And number 3, get out of the boat. So firstly, get some focus. That might seem like a really obvious way to help us to focus on Jesus, but I think it's worth saying. Sometimes I think we can make things way more complicated than they are. Now, most of you will know Sarah, and she does a lot of badminton. For anybody who knows her, knows that she does that. Sarah commits a lot of her time to playing badminton and training to be better at badminton. She set herself certain goals. Now, Sarah could have decided to be more focused on badminton, but unless she actually is more focused on badminton, she won't achieve what she wants to achieve. If Sarah allows herself to be distracted by other things and let them take her time away from training and playing, then she'll lose that focus and ultimately won't be as good as she wants to be. Like I was saying with the children, sometimes distractions can be the storms that rage around us. They can be all the stresses of life, the financial pressures, climate control, national leadership, family relationships, all sort of things that can bring stormy distractions to us. Sometimes those distractions might be nice things, good in and of themselves, but distractions nonetheless. Sometimes they might be nice things that aren't good for us. The point is that we can only have one focus at any one time. And if it's anything other than Jesus, then it's not Jesus. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying abandon all responsibility for everything else in your life. Because as anyone who drives a car knows, you can be focused on the road, but still taking in your surroundings and still physically using your hands and feet to drive the car and take responsibility for being safe. But if you focused on your feet, you would crash. I mentioned earlier as a side note about my thought of Jesus' prayer after feeding the 5,000. And I wonder whether actually that's a perfect picture of Jesus not getting distracted by the reaction of his disciples and the crowd, but actually refocusing on God, coming back to him after an amazing event, and just being with his Father. So let's get some focus and begin to train ourselves in seeing Jesus above all of the other distractions in our life. Secondly, get to know Jesus. If we're going to train ourselves in focusing on Jesus, then we really need to know what he looks like. Can you imagine picking up a Where's Wally book and being told to find Wally, but there's no indication of what Wally looks like? That would be pretty tough. They're always a good challenge, those pictures, but there's a reason that Wally looks so distinctive. It's because the creators of those pictures ultimately want you to succeed in finding him. I remember an occasion when me and Dave were first dating, and he had met my mum several times in church, but he didn't know her the way I knew her. He just knew her as someone at church's mum. He didn't know he knew what she looked like, but he didn't know the sort of clothes that she wears. He didn't know the sort of way she walks. And all those things I knew. And we were due to meet up in Exeter for some reason. And from quite far away, I spotted her with her back to us. And I was trying to point her out to Dave, and he just couldn't see who I was referring to. She was just another person in the crowd. But without even seeing her face, I knew who she was. I recognized her because I knew her. if we want to focus on Jesus, we need to know what he looks like. Now, I realize I'm using very visual language, which is not necessarily helpful when we're talking about Jesus because we can't actually physically see him. But I hope that you get my meaning. We need to know Jesus in order to find him in the distractions. To use a different type of example, sometimes when you get to know someone, you can start to anticipate their next move. It's a small thing, but if we ever go to a restaurant, I find I can usually take a pretty good guess at what Dave would like to order. To the point that if for some reason I needed to order for him, he would trust me to do that. I know him, I know his likes and his dislikes, and even more than that, I know the subtleties of his preferences. I can anticipate Dave because I know him. Like with finding my mum in the crowd because I know her. To be able to focus on Jesus, we need to know Jesus. So, how do we get to know Jesus? Well, part of the answer to that is very simple. Where is all the information that we have about Jesus? The Bible. So let's start there. I will admit to having got very sidetracked from the Bible app plans that we follow. I did really well with the Lent one, and then I haven't since then. But there is a new plan starting today, as it turns out. So a little challenge is, if we're wanting to get to know Jesus, let's turn to the Bible. And so let's get started on that plan and get stuck into the biography that we have about Jesus. I have a particular love for Jane Austen. And because of that, I've gone on to find out all the things that I can about her. I love her books. I've got all of her books. I've got all of the film and series renditions of her books. I've got them on audio books so I can listen to them in the car. I like Jane Austen. I know quite a lot about her family. I know where she lived. I've been to one of her houses. And I could tell you quite a lot about her. But the only reason I could do that is because I've spent time learning and reading and listening to what experts say. Dave recently got me a book that's kind of vaguely based on Sense and Sensibility. It's called Sense and Second Degree Murder. Yeah. There's another one called Pride and Premeditation. It reimagines the characters in more working class roles, but with the kind of same relationship outcomes, and it's still the Regency, social etiquette, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm enjoying it because I love a good murder mystery, and I also like Regency era. But every now and then I think, well, that's not how that character would respond to that. Or that's not quite the right dynamic between the sisters. Now, someone who's never read Sense and Sensibility, or has only read it once, might not be able to pick up on those things that I'm picking up on. But I've read it a few more times than once. So if I can understand fictional characters as well as that, then surely we could have a similar understanding of Jesus, who he is, how he would respond to situations and people, by reading about him in the Bible and getting to know him personally. And the best part is, Jesus wants to be known. Going back to our story, when Jesus was approaching the boat and the disciples started freaking out, Jesus says straight away, "It's me." He wasn't trying to sneak up on them. He wasn't leaving them hanging when they got scared. He wanted to be recognized. And even when Peter lost his focus and started to sink, Jesus instantly reaches out and pulls him close again to safety. Jesus doesn't want to lose Peter just for the moment of distraction. He wants to bring Peter back to him. And even through that action, Peter would have learnt so much about the nature of Jesus. It's the same for us. Jesus wants us to look for him. and get to know him. He's not trying to put himself in a Where's Wally book and be challenging to find. He's like, I'm here. I'm right here. Come and find me. Come and find out more. I want to tell you. So let's find out more so that when those distractions happen, we can look around and quickly locate our focus on Jesus, because he'll be reaching out for us. So we've had get some focus, get to know Jesus, and thirdly, get out of the boat. As I said before when we were recapping the story, I think that part of Peter's success in this story is actually just the getting out of the boat. Nobody else takes that step. But Peter is so keen to be with Jesus and to be close to him that he trusts Jesus, that the impossible can happen and that he can walk on water. There are going to be times when it's going to be easier to stay in our safe place and not put our faith in what seems to be unbelievable. And I think sometimes that's okay too. We don't see Jesus telling the other disciples off for not getting out of the boat. But also, they didn't get to walk on water. If we want to see amazing things happen, we might have to step out of the boat first. We might have to take action or believe for something that seems impossible. But if we do those things, we could see the impossible happen. So where does this leave us? I think one of the best things about this story is Peter walking on water. But in that, the greater truth is that this was only possible because Peter knew Jesus. He recognized him in the storm. And while he kept his focus on Jesus, he did an amazing thing. So where normally at the end of a sermon you might hear somebody saying, go and be more like Jesus. Today I want to say, go and be more like Peter. Get to know Jesus. Spend time with him so that you recognize him as well as Peter did. And just as Peter stepped out of the boat, take that action of faith, and you might just walk on water. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for the stories that we have in your word, for the things that it teaches us. Jesus, we thank you that you are here and wanting to be known. You're not trying to hide from us. You're not trying to trick us or make it difficult to know you. But you're just there saying, come. Come to me, come and find me, come and learn more. And so we pray this morning that we would just have open hearts to receive from you this morning just that deeper knowledge of who you are and your love for us. We thank you, God, that you want to do amazing things with us. You want to see us through the storms. And so I pray for all of us this morning that whatever the distractions are in our life that might pull our focus away from Jesus, that you would just reignite that passion in us again to find you. And even though those distractions might not necessarily disappear, we'll be able to walk on water through them.